Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new series of the webinar on paperless trade. Today, we are going to explore exciting technologies, verifiable credential and APIs, and their impact on cross-border paperless trade. We are thrilled to have you join us. And I want to say that this webinar is organized by ESCAP, our partner, ICC, ATB, and WCO. And before we proceed, let me remind you that this session will be conducted in English, but the English-Russian interpretation is available. You simply need to change the channel by clicking the globe. And you're also encouraged to post your question in the chat, and we will address them during the Q&A session. And now, let me introduce Ms. Pamela Ma, Managing Director of Digital Standard Initiative at ICC, and she will deliver her welcome remarks. Thank you, Pamela. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexei, and everyone. Welcome to this first webinar of 2025. I think the topic is entirely appropriate because, at least from a Digital Standards Initiative perspective, we spent the greater part of 2024 looking at data standards and electronic document standards. So let 2025 now be the year of trust. Okay, so, because trust is like the holy grail of digital trade and of supply chain. Because even if we converge the entire industry to align on standards, for document standards, data standards, to enable sharing and interoperability, if we cannot agree on the protocols and the governance mechanisms for how this data is shared in a manner where you can actually use technology to verify, ascertain the truth, and ascertain the origin, and trace the data as it moves down the supply chain, we won't be able to trade at all digitally. So I think trust is, that is why trust, scalable digital trust, is actually the third pillar of the DSI roadmap to digital trade. So I think with that, I'm gonna leave it open. I think there's just two things to recognize. One is that there's multiple ways to deliver the different aspects of digital trust. And that's trust of the purveyor of the information, trust that the information is true, trust in the method of delivery, and trust in the traceability of the data. So there's different ways. And the thing is, the box is already open. Everyone is now choosing their own preferred way. So there will be multiple ways to address the trust issue. And I think on this webinar, we're very lucky to have the different options available. And I think this diversity, this heterogeneity of technologies and methodologies is really important because everyone, whether you're talking about countries or industry players, is at different stage of development with regard to internet infrastructure, public infrastructure, level of capacity for digitalization. So there's different methodologies which actually meet different levels of capacity and different goals, which represent the entire diversity of the digital trading, the global trading system. So with that, let me just turn it over to the speakers. They're going to outline the different technologies and methodologies that are available. And then we're going to turn it over to a very well-known industry practitioner, Lars, to basically put it all together and tell us how it works in practice. So let me turn it back over to you, Alexei, so that we can get started. And please put your doubts, comments, questions into the chat. We always like a lively chat, so let's get started. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Pamela, for your insightful introduction. Actually, I cannot agree more than that trust is essential for cross-border paperless trade, and we are considering this topic in many aspects already. We have started our webinar about cybersecurity. There was a webinar on digital identification. There was a webinar on trust services, and it's kind of ridiculous to hear, but it's a trustless data validation. So we try to explore different approaches how to achieve this cross-border information exchange and then make it mutual recognizable. And I'm really interested to hear from our great speaker today about this approach using the verifiable credential and APIs, how we can get the original data from the source. And in order to do this, let me introduce you our keynote speaker today, Mr. Stefan Wolf. He is the chair of ICC DSI Industry Advisory Board, and he will discuss the future of trade document integrity through verifiable credentials. Thank you, Stefan, that you're with us today. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Alexei, and welcome from my side as well to esteemed speakers and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, in this call. I'm also love to see you, Shui, since I was with Clive for the last 10 years, so great to see you again. Before I start with my slides, can you also smell it? There's something in the air, something really big coming. And I would like to put this in perspective. The internet was invented 60 years ago. It was almost dormant for the next 30 years. Then the World Wide Web was invented, HTTP and all of that. And all of a sudden we had huge platforms, Lycos, Yahoo, AOL, and so on, which were followed very quickly from cloud service providers. The Googles and Microsofts in the world started back then. And then Steve Jobs gave us the iPhone, which is a computer, in your pocket, with a browser and everything else. And then, with this, we had apps, and now we have super apps, that can do everything for us. And now everybody is falling back and say, hey, wait a minute, have we missed something here? We have all these wonderful things, but what about, trust? What about security? What about identity? What about all these missing features? And we believe that, verifiable credentials, crypto, and all that kind of stuff is going to answer that question. So we hopefully believe that we will see almost like a trust spanning layer on the internet using these techniques. So I hope to keep you excited with this. In turn, I would like to share with you a few slides. I want to be quick today since we have that much time. And that's why I would like to open everybody, to put questions in the chat or send us emails. We're pretty much open for that. So the ICC, Pamela is running this very important international mission, aims to accelerate the development of digital trade. Some of us refer to this as paperless trade, and you can see here it's supported by very important international organizations, among more, the WTO, the WCO, Asian Development Bank, and Singapore. The DSI, when it was set up, we had the idea to create two, kind of like expert groups that could help shaping the vision and the future. So you can see here on this slide that we have two groups, basically the Industry Advisory Board, which I have the honor to chair. And on the right side, we have the Legal Reform Advisory Board, because I think we all know that digitalization requires some legal reforms in many countries. And you can see here from the logos that there are really good experts and really good, advisors coming together to help shaping the messages for the world on how we can help with the effort on digitalization. One of the things that was developed in the Industry Advisory Board was a document called Trust in Trade, which basically suggests in a business language so that people can understand it, why it's important to add a trust layer. And I would like to mention already the term zero trust architecture, which is a little bit, kind of like disturbing, because we all talk about more trust, and now we're talking about zero trust architectures. So in this document, we explain what we mean by that we say, rather than to trust all the intermediaries and rather to build bilateral trust layers and everything else, we should have an end-to-end verifiability of the content itself. This is meant by zero trust architecture, which is accompanied by, trust layers in the law, trust layers in governance structures, and so on and so forth. One of the important aspects is authentication. We need to know whom we're doing business with. So it's not just an identification problem, it's an authentication problem, because we need verifiability. We need a higher level of assurance that we know whom we're talking with and who sent us this document. One aspect there that I would like to highlight, the World Economic Forum has just published a report. Basically, fraud is going through the roof right now in trade and supply chain. Nobody wants to talk about this. It's a little bit annoying, of course, but it's happening, right? And with Gen AI and all these new modern technologies, frauds has been even cheaper, to do that. So we need more authentication. We need more architectural design for reliability of systems. And there are three ways of achieving that. The classic PKI business with X509 certificates, which are pretty big all around the world, the European Union, EIDAS, in Asia, Japan, lots of countries have created a trust infrastructure around identity using the X509 standard. But again, it's a 30 years old standard, and there are some shortcomings with this approach, which is why in the next iteration, people started to develop blockchain and DLT type applications. There we see many standards, many different systems, many proprietary systems. So this is like an emerging kind of like industry in itself for the last 10 years. And now people talk about interoperability, how can we bridge from one to the other, right? And these kind of questions, which is unresolved still. And at the horizon, we see already, and that's what I meant by the smell is in the air, the verifiable credentials as a very simple technical means to achieve what we have asked for in the Trust in Trade paper. And again, there are upcoming standards, sometimes even competing standards, which is pretty normal at the beginning of such a new journey. But keep in mind that all three of them are utilities that can be used to build a higher degree of certainty in our supply chains. And what a supply chain really looks like, I don't want to go into all the details. We basically say today we have the business layer where we run RFPs, we sign contracts and all these kind of things, get offers and so forth. Then we have the physical layer where we ship products and goods, but also services. We have the financial layer because for everything that we ship, we want to get our financial reward. We want to have trade finance and all the other topics. And then we have the information, the documentation along the lines. And today, much of that is still on paper. And by paper, I mean also PDFs as a derivative, as an electronic derivative of paper. And the reason is very simple. Everybody uses a computer, whether it's a Word, file for printing an invoice, or whether it's a large ERP system. But when it comes to crossing borders, when it comes to crossing systems, then all of a sudden people start to print it out or generate a PDF and send it by email. And then on the other side, you have to key in the data again, or you have like AI to fetch data from documents. If you want to get rid of paper, and there's an important aspect of it, because paper is the only protocol, let me call it this way, that is interoperability for every player in the world. Everyone can trade with everybody else on paper. If you want to replace paper, you have to have a similar structure where everybody can trade with everybody else. And that structure needs a trust layer. And that's why we're proposing from ICC DSI that the world should look into the trust layer itself so that we can really trust the information. And coming back to fraud, paper has one advantage too, and that is that fraud and criminal stuff and so forth is pretty local. Yes, you can cause a lot of damage for a firm or a couple of firms or so forth, but with the introduction of digital trade, all of a sudden you can accelerate that, you can amplify that, you can do fraud on a much higher scale, and we see first tendencies to come that. So a lot of good things that we need to talk about. And when you look at supply chains and holistic networks, then you see always you have a buyer, the seller, or importer, exporter, and so forth, but lots of intermediaries to help with the effort. ICC suggests that we have roughly 160 million, entities participating some way or the other in trade, of which roughly 60,000 are intermediaries. So it's a pretty big number, whether it's banks, logistical firms, shippers, whatever. And for that, we need data standards. And this is the document that Pamela was also referring to, another publication from DSI, the key trader documents and data elements. And in this document, the team took apart all of these data standards that are available today. Some of them are even competing, described them and isolated the data elements within the standards and how they can marry with each other. So it's a very foundational work, and we see the pickup from the industry is quite heavy. So I can really recommend to review those two documents, because together they give you like the recipe for going digital. And that interesting aspect is that, you know, everybody talks about the huge complexity of international trade, but when you look at this, then you see we have identified just 36 trade documents. That's not that much. That's the core of what we need. There might be lots of other stuff along with it, but that's the core of what we're talking about, whether it's a bill of lading, whether it's a warehouse receipt, whether it's an invoice, whether it's, I don't know, a certificate of origin. These are the key components of our ecosystem. And with just 36 trade documents, we all believe that there's a big chance that we will get it done and digitalize them all. I talked about the importance of authentication, and I would like to highlight this a little bit more and pave the way also for Shuey later and what Life does. In order to know who we're doing business with, it's not just good enough to know the company and to have a business registry number. We need a higher level of assurance. We need to do lots more background check. Let me give you one example. We need to know whether the invoice that was sent is authorized by the company. And within the company, there might be a department, there might be an organizational structure, there might be a procurement manager with certain authorities. We need to understand that. And in many reporting regimes, those names have also to be disclosed. So what we need is not just the identity of an organization, namely the business or tax numbers, and the name and the identity of the individual. We also need an organizational aspect of this. We need to know what the role of the individual plays in a certain context. And we need to know the authority that comes along with it. So that's what we call the organizational identity piece, which is pretty new. That's not embedded in legal systems yet, and it's not embedded in digital identity schemes. But I can assure you, everybody's talking about this now, and we believe that this is the way going forward. And it spans all internet domains, things, individuals, you know, all kinds of other things. And on the left side, you see a few examples. And for the supply chain world, you can, you know, consider a physical container coming with a device, you know, tracking all the key parameters, where it is, location, temperature, humidity, all these kinds of things. You know, the container on the ship gets to the airport. The container in the future will be a smart device. It will order its own crane, for instance, and other things. So identity and authenticity is not just required for people and organizations. It's also very much required for things. And we distinguish between subjects and objects we're talking about. The application of this is limitless in this regard. And I would like to give you, as my last slide, a very nice example where organizational identity, individual identity, digital identity, trust layers is already, you know, at the beginning of being implemented. I used the example from Hong Kong. Citizen is the official issuer of digital certificates to individuals in Hong Kong, to citizens. And this has been embedded in many types of applications, education, labor departments, all these kind of things use that layer. And now on the bottom, you see EBRAM, the arbitration center. Now, all of a sudden, Hong Kong has developed a solution where people can upload their trade documentation, contracts, everything else. And in case of a dispute, it's like a virtual arbitration court that happens. And all of this requires information about your organizational identity. So EBRAM is a very good example where this can be used immediately in a real world example. Another one is the the merchants, you know, trying and selling goods and services around the world. So we believe, and I've personally spoke with all the people here in Hong Kong and many other places in the world. This is not just Hong Kong. This is in many other places the same thing. It's just an example. It's now happening. And that is why I believe that after 30 years of having the internet and the World Wide Web in particular, we're now at the verge, at the beginning of something really new that creates a much higher level of trust and authenticity in the layer. And verifiable credentials, in my opinion, are the core concept for doing that. And I'm looking forward to the discussion and your questions to discuss this, because again, there's a new universe that opens up for us. And I think this webinar alone shows how much of an interest these topics have now in the industry. And again, thanks to the organizers for putting this up.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. I also feel this wind of change. And I'd like, because before we proceed, can you please just, simply describe what is verifiable credentials? Because I think our audience, haven't read the report you presented. And what is verifiable credentials for you? And how does it work? How it's different from the paper you said?
Do you remember? I don't know how many years ago it was. People shipped goods and services on pallets in sacks. They put all into ships with a lot of labor, and then all of a sudden containers were invented. And then two ports tried this out. They shipped goods and services using containers, and all of a sudden, boom, the whole world used that standard for shipping goods and services in a much easier, much faster, and much more reliable way. Verifiable credentials are like these containers. This time, just not for physical goods, but for the data itself. So a verifiable credential is a data container, if you like. And in order to secure it, in order to make sure that you can verify that you can rely on it, these containers are cryptographically sealed. And I don't want to go into the math of this here today and all of that. Just trust me that this has been addressed by many people, and there are good solutions out there. So what we're saying is, you put your stuff into a data container, a verifiable credential. That could be an identity credential, that could be an invoice, that could be anything. And then you ship it to the other side. And how many intermediaries in the middle? Doesn't matter. The endpoints can always verify that the information comes from the source and the information has not been tampered with. What it does not do for you, just to give you a small warning, it doesn't tell you whether the information is true. If a car is green and I sell it and I put in the contract blue, yes, there is a discrepancy between the real world and the contract. And this discrepancy must be checked by other means. So we talk about verification and authentication. We're not talking about true information. That's another layer that needs to be added.
Thank you for your clarification. Am I right that this verifiable credential rely on the cryptography, the algorithm to make it verifiable, and it's trust services, in other words, as you just mentioned, authentication and other trust services.
And that is where math can do magical things, right? Again, the theory is actually quite simple. You can create a pair of keys. One is your own key that you never share with anybody else. It better not leave your computer anyway. And the other key is a public key. And with this combination of private public keys, something really, really miraculously happens. And that is that you can encode something, can conceal something with your private key. And with the exposure of the public key, everybody in the world can verify it comes from you. But it's irreversible. You cannot, take a look at the public key and then you determine what kind of private key you have used for encryption. Even quantum computers are not going to change that. Everybody talks about that. We're light years away from that. Even quantum computers can do that because there are new algorithms coming. There are, lots of methods to avoid this from happening. So you can really be certain that with cryptographic means you can trust the information.
Okay. Great. That was my big surprise actually when I started to explore the verifiable credential, because we had the webinar on trust services, And we have discussed a lot of issues. Why is it so complicated to make the trust services live in cross-border exchange? Because, okay, you have trust services, brilliant work, PKI infrastructure, all of settled at the national level. But when you're going cross-border, different legislation, different cryptography standards, and that's it.
May
You
I
have
add
to rely on the
one thing?
certification agencies. You have to rely on trust service providers, and other. And probably that was the reason why I asked also both to join us today, because he is representing the industry of blockchain, and he had a lot of in this area. And it's a kind of another way of DID, right? So this decentralized identification stuff. And probably we as you mentioned also, Stefan, in your presentation, there's 3 ways, right? So I would like both to jump in our discussion and to present what is blockchain can suggest in this area, if not a trust services, if not this quite complicated infrastructure, I must say, with all of the certification agencies and other stuff. Can you please tell us if the blockchain really can help us with verifiable credential concept? I'd like to introduce you our next panelist, Boris Lesem from WebBL. Boris, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Alexei, and thank you for inviting me to this interesting webinar. Can you hear me? I can see it. Yeah, great. Okay. So when we talk about digital trade or digitalizing global trade, we need to remember that the 2 core, or even the biggest core document, the cornerstone that we need to digitalize in order to perform that shift, is the bill of lading, the transfer from the paper to the electronic bill of lading. And what is so special about that document in comparison to all the other documents? It's not the fact that it needs to be only authentic or original, because all documents, have to be authentic and original, at least as a goal. It's the fact that we need to exclusively identify a party in control of that document and in any existing moment. That's what makes it different, because the bill of lading is, the key to the goods on the ship, and the cornerstone of the transaction, involving banks, involving importers, exporters, freight forwarders. This document passes hands, and that is where electronic bill of lading platforms steps in, like WaveBL and others. Today there are, I think, 12 EBL platforms. 10 out of them are using blockchain technology. So if there is one field in the world where we can see that blockchain has prevailed as a good and acceptable solution, it would actually be in this field. When we understand that the blockchain is just a utility and infrastructure to track the transferring of possession in a reliable way, in an auditable way, and in a way that everyone can accept quite easily. Why did blockchain succeed in this field? My personal opinion is because this field involves a lot of different sectors: banks, ocean carriers, freight forwarders, governments. It's very hard for all these sectors to create their own closed environment. This is why when companies out of the private sector have started offering these kind of solutions, blockchain was seen as a very easy way to audit the way that these systems work in a public way, which everyone can have vision of, and see that they can trust that infrastructure. So, and please feel free, to add any questions if you have, but I would like to talk about the second biggest challenge that we have when we try and digitalize global trade and the bill of lading. And this, by the way, refers also very much to the electronic bill of exchange, which I believe is still a revolution that we do not see, but we will see in the coming years once the adoption of electronic bills of lading will increase. The second challenge is identification of the parties in control. Now, everyone can insert their details of the company they work at. but it needs to be in a way that it could be easily and with certain being recognized by all other parties on the environment, in the environment. Everybody understands that filling in information time after time is a waste of time. It's a place for discrepancies also. You know, if you have a company name with one letter, you know, one space in the end, or one dot, it can become, you know, make the whole identity unrecognizable. And that is a challenge that everybody has, all the platforms have, all the supply chain has, accurately identifying. Wave, by the way, have partnered in the past with Glyph regarding using LEIs, legal entity identifiers. That kind of solution is the best kind of solution platforms can have. Having one acceptable oracle where you can pull out the data from, save time for your customer, he doesn't need to fill in the information, and knowing that it will be the 100% accurate piece of information. Then, once you manage to at least identify who you're talking about, who is a company, you pair that with a blockchain identity, and then you can at least say, all right, it's probably company ABC. They are holding exclusive possession right now of the document. The second biggest challenge with the identity afterwards is how do we verify that that is really the company that is supposed to be behind that identity. That's where verifiable credentials step in. Now, the best idea of verifiable credential is that if we use a credential and then we have some kind of oracle or server where these credentials are managed, and then we receive a confirmation that from that oracle that the credentials that were used are authorized by the person who controls those credentials in that server, okay, in that registry, like an admin of an identity of a company, of a digital identity of a company, authorized that that is really the company represented. We don't really care about the actual person in the organization who approved or identified. We just need to know that it was done by under that legal entity. These two things are the key to streamline digitalization and global trade adoption, and to speed up onboarding and time to issuance of electronic bills of lading with carriers and freight forwarders who need to accurately digitally identify companies who are their customers in the real world, but have now a digital identity that needs to be paired together.
Thank you, boss. And I totally agree with you that the data possession management is really important in terms of that. And this kind of technology, verifiable credential, can be used. And I was thinking about two questions. Probably we can discuss during Q&A session. The first question is, you mentioned 12 solutions are using the blockchain technology for EBL of lading. Do we understand each other? And the second question, do you have this verifiable credentials already in place, or you're still thinking about that kind of technology? If you have very short answer for these two questions, please.
I have a very short answer for both questions. I start with the second question. Whatever is good for the world is good for us. We can connect to how many sets of credentials there are in the market. If it's one that is acceptable, that would be best. That's why, you know, we chose Glyph out of a real, you know, simple understanding. That's the best solution we can find. It's not a private sector offering. If it was a private sector offering, we could have, you know, relied on our own. And
do you understand?
Honest, we'll answer the first question in the Q&A session afterwards.
Okay, the 12 solutions. So it's 12 different blockchains, and it's
about the connection. It's a complicated answer. I think we'll answer about interoperability between them.
Let's take it further. Okay, great. We have to move to our next speaker, Mr. Phil Archer, Director of Web Solution at JS1. Actually, we have discussed this topic last week, and I really liked that discussion because Phil was like, you know, had some doubts about these technologies, and I know that you, Phil, was engaged in the very, very beginning stage of verifiable credential W3. see, and now you're working for JS1, and you were not really rushed to the implementation of these technologies. But now something has changed, probably the wind of change already so strong that you are really considering to apply this methodology. And I would hear from you, what is your perspective on that?
Thank you, Alexei, and thank you for all the previous speakers, because I want to pick up on what a lot of people have said already. So, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm not as negative as you sound. Far from it. I'm actually very positive about verifiable credentials. Very positive indeed. I have been for a long time. I'm just slightly cautious about it. That's all. I mean, we talk about exchanging verifiable credentials. Stefan, I'm going to pinch your analogy for what a VC is. Thank you. I will use that, and I'll claim that I invented it. But what does a VC actually mean? It means passing a little bit of structured text, a little bit of data from me to you to someone else along the chain. And we also talk about verifying signatures. Well, what is a digital signature? That is just a long string of characters that is essentially impossible to guess. And that's a critical part of the verifiable credential. It's just a bit of text. And you as a human being, I as a human being, actually, I can read a verifiable credential. I can parse it in my head and see what it says. But I can't verify a signature in my head. And I strongly suspect that you can't either. You need a bit of software to do that. The thing that actually reads that credential and passes it on and verifies that signature is software. Did you write that software? My guess is you didn't. So actually, every time that you verify a signature, every time you verify that opening up this data container, it did come from the person that says it came from them and it hasn't been tampered with since it left. You can verify all that, but you're doing it with a bit of software. As Pamela began today by talking about 2025 as a year of trust, what are you actually trusting? You're trusting the software that does the verification for you. It's the same with APIs. You're trusting that the software behind the API and the software you're using to access that API is itself trustworthy, and the processes and the companies behind those. It's perfectly possible, one might even say easy, to write software that appears to verify something and actually does nothing of the sort. There's no magic bullet here. A green check mark on a website, a PDF with a fancy logo on it, they mean nothing. They never have meant anything. They still don't mean anything. So that globally interoperable thing called paper, which I fully understand is the only fully interoperable thing, it does carry that risk. And so we're looking at the software that does this work so that we can actually put some faith in that. Now, as Buzz was just saying, there are lots of different systems in place already. And people like to use what they've got already. Of course, whether that's a personal emotional attachment or more likely they've invested heavily in what they've got. They don't want to have to throw that away and start again. So every time you hear somebody say, we should align our standards, you know what that means, right? When I say you should align your standards, what I mean is you should use my standards. That's what it means. Aligning standards very often means throw away what you're doing and do what I do instead. Now, if everyone actually used one method to go to Buzz, if there was one blockchain, if there was one standard for everything, yep, you get complete interoperability. It's not going to happen because people are people, investments are investments, and in fact, we have to accept that there is some variety. And in the case of verifiable credentials, that variety is quite extreme. There are different syntaxes, there are different signing methods, there are different exchange methods, there are different presentation layers. Sorry, I'm going too quickly. I should remember I'm a native English speaker. I must slow down. Apologies. There are lots of different elements of a verifiable credential. Some people think blockchains are essential. Bowers being one of them. Others are at the other end of the spectrum and think the whole blockchain thing is a complete waste of silicon. I imagine that around the room there are a variety of views on that. Now, there has been some convergence in standards, but it's not complete. If you try and force a particular standard or system on people, many will just say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stick with doing what I'm doing. So you have to have some flexibility. A key individual in the history of the internet, John Postel, said you should be conservative in what you offer and flexible in what you accept. But flexibility means less interoperability. That's inevitable. And that, of course, is a barrier to adoption. If we are to succeed in this community of moving cross-border trade to a fully digital system everywhere in the world, it's a real challenge because of those differences that we see. And if you go ahead and build a verifiable credential issuing and verification system using one particular set of technology, don't be surprised if for years' time you've got to actually re-engineer some of that because you've got a big customer or a big use case that says, no, I want the other flavor. Now, we're about to publish an analysis of the current landscape. We've done some work recently on what is the current set of standards, who is doing what's gaining favor, and so on. I had hoped to have that ready for today. I'm sorry, for reasons I won't bore you with. It's not available yet, but it will be very soon. And those findings are actually part of the reason for why, yes, GS1 is committed to using verifiable credentials. Yes, we will be able, in some parts of the world, to issue VCs that give an enhanced level of trust for the identification system that we operate around the world, used for most famously in the barcode. So yes, we are very confident about it, but we're also cautious. We recognize that we can't decide. We can't tell today which technical stack is the one to use. Some tend to be winning out. The UN Transparency Protocol, I think, is a really good set, but even there are some things that we think might need tweaking. So our investment is going to be modest to start off with. We're taking a crawl, walk, run approach, and right now we're actually only committed to crawl. Time will tell whether or not we move to the next phase and what that phase would be. That depends on this community as much as anybody. We believe we will. We certainly hope we will. As Alexei was kind enough to say, I've been on this journey myself in one way or another now for a very long time. I definitely believe in this technology. I really think it can make a difference. And it's discussions like this one today that are going to help us, I hope, do a little bit of convergence or enough convergence that we can move forward and work together. So yes, let's do it, but be careful out there.
Thank you, Phil. It was concise and very insightful. Thank you for you mentioning about the standards. And I think that someone should lead in this area. We are still waiting for this standard, right? So there are a couple of organizations.
Be careful. Be careful on that one, Alexei. There are loads of standards, right? So you get to XKCD 927. We've got 14 standards. Oh, we need one to bring them all together. Oh, now we've got 15 standards.
Okay. Yeah, but probably GS1 will be leading them and strive others to use their standards as it's already done before with other standards from GS1. It's really interesting. Thank you very much. And now let's turn to Ms. Shu Tan. She represents the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. And I personally really want to hear from you, Shu, because last year I met Alexander, the new chair of the GLIFE, and he presented me the concept of VLAI. And I was super excited about this technology. It's not about identification, it's not about the organization in the list, but it's more than that. It's really the key to develop other layers for verifiable credentials, which will consist of roles in organization and many other stuff. And it will be decentralized, which is also good. And you are not striving people to connect only to your platform, but rather than using their own systems. It's really interesting to hear, and I'm glad to pass the ball to you.
Thank you, Alexei, and hi everyone. Many thanks for having me here today. And indeed, it's great to see many familiar faces like our former CEO Stefan. So the LEI and the VLEI already have been mentioned by many speakers earlier, and definitely it's my pleasure to give you some more details. With that, let me just quickly share my screen. So for those audience who are not very familiar with us, so maybe just a few words about GLIFE. GLIFE is a non-for-profit Swiss foundation, and it is being established by the Financial Stability Board in 2014. The purpose of GLIFE is really to manage the global LEI system. So that being said, as you can see, GLIFE is being overseen by the Regulatory Oversight Committee, which consists of 71 regulators, 19 observers from 50 countries. And many of them are, let's say, national or regional central banks, financial regulators. Some of them are also international organizations like IFC or OECD. So GLIFE has 18 independent board directors, and we work very closely with our accredited LEI issuing organizations. We call them the LOUs. Right now, we have 38 accredited LOUs who have issued already more than 2.8 million LEIs today. So what is the LEI? On this slide, you can see an example of the LEI of Nestle as an entity and its reference data. So as you can see, the LEI is based on ISO 17442 standard. It is a lifelong and unique identifier owned by the respective entity. In the reference data, you can find basic information such as the legal name, where it is registered locally, the local registration number, and also the child and parent relationship data. All this data have to be validated against the local authoritative sources. So that means as long as the entity has an LEI, you can be sure that it is a real entity. And all this data can be accessed by all users completely for free via our LEI search or GLIFE API. So the LEI can identify legal entities uniquely on a global level. However, especially when we exchange data, it is very important to know, for example, if the entity or the individual with whom you are interacting with is indeed who they are, and also if the documents or the data remain trustworthy across different jurisdictions, platforms, or systems. So that's why, actually, to resolve these questions, GLIFE has also created the Verifiable LEI, which is basically a digital version of the LEI by marrying the LEI with verifiable credentials. And basically, with the VLEI, of course, it can help to authenticate different organizations, and also, on the other hand, the individuals who are affiliated with the organization. So just as an example, in the real world, I, as an individual, work for GLIFE in the role of head of business development in Asia. So all this information can actually be digitally represented in a verifiable credential with the LEI representing the GLIFE as the entity. So with this credential, it is being issued by my employer, and it is also cryptographically secure. So I can use it also to conduct certain authorized actions on behalf of GLIFE. And yeah, as we talk about trust, how is the trust being established ultimately with the VLEI? So within the VLEI trust framework, GLIFE acts as the root of the trust. And the ground for GLIFE to take this role is also due to the verified LEI data I mentioned earlier, which roots back to the local authoritative registration sources. GLIFE then conducts qualification of organizations who then become qualified VLEI issuers, the QVIs, and these QVIs will further issue VLEI credential to legal entities on an organizational level and also to their authorized representatives, who will then further issue VLEI credentials to their employees, clients, suppliers, or any other affiliated individuals. Therefore, the whole trust chain is being established, and it is also being reflected in the chain of the VLEI credentials. The VLEI credential, so the VLEI can be used in various use cases, but there are mainly three core functions, which are digital signing, authentication, and also permissioning. For example, I can use my GLIFE VLEI credential to sign certain documents within my authorization. I can use it to authenticate my role within GLIFE, and I can also use it to access certain systems or data which I'm permitted to. The same can also be conducted with an organizational level VLEI. And one example usage of the VLEI is in trade is its usage in digital trade document exchange platforms and networks. So such platforms and networks are definitely critical to achieve paperless trade, while ensuring the authenticity and integrity of trade documents. These platforms or networks are also facing challenge. Boaz already highlighted earlier these challenges, such as how to precisely identify participating entities, and also how to deploy technically interoperable credentials or trust frameworks to verify the trustworthiness of the trade documents. In this context, the LEI as a globally recognized unique entity identifier can be deployed to enable entity identification globally. And the VLEI, as it is using the authentic chain data container specification based on carry protocol, which makes it also technically agnostic to different blockchain or cloud platforms. So it can also be used across different platforms or networks as a trusted framework.
Great.
And sorry, please, Alexei.
Yeah, it's a practical case, or?
Yeah, I just very quickly finish this case and then that's it. Yeah. So just a very quick example on the EBL platform. So Boaz also mentioned about how important this document it is. It flows through the almost entire trade flow with changes of controls across the logistics system, financial system, and trade system upon different steps. So across the whole process, the LEI can be used on the EBL platform first as the identifier to identify different entities to streamline the KYC processes. And also the users can use the Glyph API to retrieve the LEI data. And second, the VLEI can act as an interoperable and verifiable trust framework across different platforms to authenticate the legal entity or its authorized individuals, to also sign specific data or documents, and also to onboard entity or individual users. So Boaz mentioned already their collaboration with us. Basically, WaveBL is in process to adopt the LEI to identify participating entities on their platform. And basically also on the VLEI to provide simple validity proof of trade documents on the organizational level to their recipients. Similarly, another EBL platform, TradeGo, is also exploring the same, the adoption of the LEI and VLEI as a unified ID across different platforms. So I will stop here. I know that we don't have a lot of time, but happy to answer questions afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Shu, for clarification about how VLEI can work. And I feel that you already have a solid base already, the base for the answer question, who is who in international trade. And another part of this, another question is what they sell and buy, and what are the operation that they're doing. In this case, there should be another base for the goods description. And with that, I'm like to move to our next panelist, Lars Carlson. He's a global head of trade and customs consulting at Maersk, and he's a visionary thought leader in international trade and customs. And Lars, I read all of your articles last year, all of 6 you published, and the last one was about trust and the truth of trust and something like this. I would definitely want to hear from you, your perspective. So we have a Glyph, we have a verifiable credential. What is missing in order to make it work? And another issue I'm thinking about that we try to eliminate the paper. Paper is super useful now, but I think that it's not only about eliminating paper. It's about to suggest something more important than paper, because paper is not relevant, actually. It's not really rely on paper. It's a bad idea. But what we should suggest better than paper. That's why people will buy it. That's why they will implement this system. Thank you very much for you to join us, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Alexei. It's a great pleasure to be here, everybody. It is a very timely event, and it's great to have this opportunity to debate and discuss these things. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that trade and customs digitalization is accelerating. We've seen that through the global pandemic and the other crisis of macros we've seen over the last years. The bad news is it's going too slow. So we need to speed it up, as you were saying in your introduction, and the other speakers have been talking about, because we live in a time of change. We know that, right? We've seen all of these incidents. A complicated world of trade is getting more complex as we speak, right? And it's not only the world itself, not only the trade world, the way we look at it, but it's industry as well is in change and transformation. And of course, this is only the start. We will see more changes the next 5 years for international trade that we've seen in the last 50. The latest is, of course, ESG, environmental, social protection, and governance rules and regulations that are now put in place, which are supply chain regulations, multi-tier, demanding importers, exporters to know their full supply chain, all partners, and various elements of new data that is necessary to meet these requirements to even enter into a specific destination or market somewhere. We are monitoring, we've seen 4 of these regulations already in operations in North America and Europe, and there are 10 more that is coming. And of course, the answer to this is data. And there's no doubt about that this is data. And we know that trade is good. It is what generates growth, job creation, what fights poverty, all of those things. But doing that, we also need to know how we can actually then move forward in this very complicated world that we see. And again, data is the answer. And you probably know Maersk, most of you that is on this call, as an ocean shipper. But we do not define ourselves as an ocean shipper anymore. We define ourselves as an integrator of trade because we are transforming like the industry is. And it's about basically being able to, as one of the biggest mover of goods in the world, to move goods from end to end, from origin to destination in a seamless way as possible in this very difficult world. And we need to remember that the various integrated value chains today are very complicated in itself for most industries. It used to be high tech and automotive and so forth. It's basically every industry and vertical today. And it means that goods passes borders 4 or 5 times already in production cycles before it even going to the end consumer. Borders becomes extremely important. Means that we need to find new solutions that you're talking about, right? And that's why we are spending 24/7 with our 7,000 engineers in Maersk to actually become a manager of data, to be able and serve clients, but serve it in an open type of space where people can go together with us and our partners and our competitors to actually make this better, right? So data is number 1, then move to trust, which is the kind of topic of today, right? Because trust is the element we really need to develop. And of course, we've been doing that for many years in various type of setups, like the compliance management models for certification of operators, authorized economic operators from WCO, other type of trusted trader programs when it comes to compliance. Now we are about to connect the data flows that we've been talking about here, other speakers have been talking about, and then verifying that in various ways with those other trust elements that are there. And it's important to remember that trust is never given, right? Trust is something you actually earn. But it also means that when you have earned it, you also need to get a reward from it, because that is what drives a trust-based system. So in many ways, what we do today is creating in Maersk intelligent digital trade corridors based on this. We call it trusted value chain, powered by data, powered by AI. And the reason for that is that, as I said, it's all about data. We collect source data. We collect, we verify, we validate, we use and reuse, and we process data for our customers all through the supply chain. The thing that we now need to do together, and that's why we create these intelligent digital trade corridors, is the fact that we also need to start exchanging it in a much more flexible and agile way. And of course, to do that, we need to include the borders, because we need to open up that black box of the border where we can optimize supply chain and value chains between borders, but not through borders. And that is what we need to do. That is why we need APIs. That's why we need to have verifiable credentials and various kinds. So we are creating a digital passport, product passport for goods in our way to do this in this intelligent digital trade corridors. Because the idea with the digital trade corridors is to connect to a trusted trade lane, right? It's connecting A to B. but also do it in a way where it's interoperable. So you then can connect B to C and C to D and so forth in an inclusive and fair way. So it's not only the regular supply chain routes that we have today, but also new routes. It could be easy to become a node in that new system. And what we then do to create this digital passport for goods, which is interesting, by the way, because we all on this call know what a digital passport for people traveling is. It is our identity, it is our status, it's our traveling record. It is what we need to pass a border. If there's a digital border for travelers, we know that we only read our passport in a passport reader or even have facial recognition to pass. And all our statuses, if it's ETA, ESTA, or Visa, is then acknowledged. Why couldn't we have that for goods? Of course we can. And it's about doing a multi-layer kind of badge. And it doesn't have to be one badge for the entire world, and some of the other speakers have been talking about that. It's really about using technology and data together with the knowledge and trade compliance records that we do have to create that trust in the various of the stakeholders, right? So our trust badge, the digital passport we are developing together with customers, together with customs administration, border agencies around the world right now, is one, the product data. So looking into the commodity and product itself, the identity of it, where does it come from? With, again, big data collected with different million of data points to look into the stakeholder network. So the second part is the stakeholder data, who has been involved in various ways with this specific product. And then it's the supply chain visibility data, who are the other players that are involved, where have the goods been, how has it been transshipped, whatever it is. And the fourth part of it is supervision, smart containers, smart devices that make sure that if we have the true identity, if we have the data that we've collected in one place that can be used and reused in a harmonized, safe and secure way and exchanged voluntarily, then we should also make sure it's not interrupted in the way by different risks of different illegal activities and what so forth. And of course, our smart containers and our competitors' smart containers today goes end to end. And again, they check everything from accessibility to movement to temperature and whatever you have in these containers, right? So for governments, it's about getting smarter risking, because we have done scale testing with UK, we are doing it with European Union, we've been doing it with a number of countries in the Middle East, but also, again, built APIs and connections for this to, for instance, UNCTAD's Asakuda system, which is operated by more than 100 countries in the developing emerging economy world. So it's possible to do. It's not a traditional big market or developed country type of setup we are talking about here. And it's about exchanging data voluntarily based on a trust-based system to actually make sure we have all the things we need for a border crossing, for a border agency perspective. We've done that in UK in the ecosystem of Trustpilot we created with 11 border agencies and 11 of our clients and stakeholders and also competitors involved to actually identify things 90% of what comes to the border long before it is at the border. So risk management can be used all through the supply chain by various trusted partners. And then, of course, it's about verify these partners and the data that is there. And before ending up the summary about how you actually can do that in intelligent digital trade corridor with a passport for goods, we need to think about trade facilitation. I know one of your favorite topics, Alexei, as well, because I heard Stephen say it's only 36 documents we need to digitalize. I believe it's less than 36. We need to do the trade facilitation first. We got to remember that paper-based system that colleagues on this panel were talking about is decades old. It's 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, older than internet and older than the World Wide Web. And it's not necessarily the right selection of data that we have more data than that today. Why not share that instead of the traditional ones? There are some key documents. E-bill of lading was mentioned as very important to digitalize. There's a number of others because we do need this data to be verifiable and digital and so forth. So let's think about that before. So we do not by definition digitalize a paper system or digitize a paper system, but look at what do these different stakeholders need to do a more seamless and safer and secure process. So we have the systems. Let's make them interoperable and interconnected instead by doing agile framework legislation, the work that is done by Pamela. And of course, we've seen in the UK Electronic Trade Documents Act is very valid, right? What is the needed the criteria for the different stakeholders? Let's agree on those. And then there could be various ways, different solutions. Solutions are developed all the time. So we have the data, yeah, let's make sure we can use and reuse it and exchange it. And we have the accreditation systems. We just need to connect them so it's fair and transparent and so forth. And to private sector people, you got to own your own data today. People don't. Data is all around the place with various stakeholders, with no connections, with no management and monitoring of it. So your data needs to be owned. It is like basically the currency for new trade. It's basically money in the bank. So treat it that way. Own your own data, make sure that you validate the partners you have in your supply and value chain so you know what they are, who they are, what they are doing, and you can actually connect the things and then use the already existing systems in various ways. Because it is really about trusting the truth, right? It is about trusting the data that is there in various ways. I had an old friend in Dutch customs when I worked in Swedish customs once many years ago that always said, goods do not smuggle, people do. So we do need to verify the data so it's valid as possible. We need to validate various ways what the goods are, and we also need to know the stakeholders, right? And we need to connect that to a truth kind of trust badge that can be credibly verified and used along the supply chain in various ways. And that can have different elements. It can have different things from different suppliers, but it needs to have a minimum criteria and a minimum way to verify it. And my final point, I could talk, as you already discovered, 2 more days about this or forever, but let's do something now. You know, we have a lot of things. I think there's an interest, and Stephen said it in the morning, right? Starting this, that it's really important that we feel that energy and start piloting testing. A little bit less conversation, a little bit more action, right? Like Elvis said, it's important because we can do these things. Sometimes people think that business, our customers, the biggest clients of the world, don't want to exchange data. We do. It needs to be in a reasonable way. It needs to be in a safe and secure way. And again, it needs to be also paying benefits back. So government agencies need to start look at trade compliance record to become smarter risking, to use their data better, to use trade compliance records. We sometimes act, and we also did it on this panel, to discuss if, how do we verify the new transaction coming in? Well, there have maybe been 25,000 transactions from exactly these stakeholders before coming to the border. Why not use that as a good credential as well to build into a trust badge? If you've done it correctly the last 10 years, maybe there might be another way to verify that your risk is still a low risk and compliant. So we don't need to create the best perfect system. We need to create something in the first step that is better than what we have today. And again, those paper-based systems that are there, it might be right, as Phil was saying, we can't verify every electronic signature because we don't know who the programmer was or who is actually the software that is verifying that. But in reality today, we border agencies as well, and governments actually get a paper signed by somebody they don't know, collected, produced data from various sources they really don't know very much about. And that is what we do risk management on, release goods on at borders. Because borders is the key here. That's my final point. Borders is the engine. Borders is the financing that will make this work. If we can release goods quicker at borders, if we can do controls earlier or afterwards or at destination instead of at borders, that's all of the financing we need to make this work and make trade and customs digital. And that is the future. Trust the truth, but verify. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. As usual, it's very inspiring what you're talking about. And the small question to you that I personally see that you believe in this verifiable credential concept and all of these APIs and the global world connection within this network. Well, is it really easy to have the negotiation with your big clients that they have to implement the system which will support the verifiable credential to sign this electronically? And moreover, is it easy to take on board the government agency? Why they should trust the data within your platform?
I think, everything, like Professor Einstein once said, everything is relative, right? So it depends on what you mean. But I think, I would say yes, because it needs to be, what you need to do, obviously, is to really show the value proposition for both parties here. And there is a value proposition for government agencies, for border agencies, because they are fighting a very important battle for all of us as citizens. They're trying to protect citizens. They're trying to do revenue collection. They're trying to do a number of things in a very difficult new world. They need tools and instruments to do that. One is to get data early, verified data. They can do smarter risking for smarter customs, smarter borders, smarter trade. For trade, on the other side, today, what we see is that the supply chain, as I said before, it can't be decentralized. It can't be segmented anymore. It doesn't work because for many of our big clients today, the transport cost is bigger than the production cost. And that is just growing with all of these complexities in the ESG and whatever is coming now. So you need to know your supply chain value chain better. And to do that, they need systems and solutions for that. And one of the way of financing that is making sure you get resilience, predictability at borders, and basically not only at borders, but that is the missing piece for the moment, because we can optimize it. We can reroute. They put in source strategies, different type of, strategies for handling a lot of the risk management with the AI systems we have already today, predictive analysis, big data analysis and management and so forth. We can do that, but we do not control the borders. So there need to be a new partnership where we say, okay, we have data. We are willing to share it if we get something back. If you look at our trade compliance records, you see what we've done before. You can actually have a different border process in place. Doesn't mean you don't inspect and control. In fact, we have 20 years of experience on borders to actually see that these type of system-based controls are much better than the transaction inspections they're doing today. So there's something in it for everybody, and the answer is win-win.
Great. It sounds very promising, actually.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. And let's also go to our next speaker, Mr. Juan Diego Chavarria from WCO. And he will be talking about the WCO data model and verifiable credential and how link the data and to reflect this work and the work of WCO. Juan, really happy to see you again.
Thank you, Alexei. Happy for being here and for you and your team to have us here. So if you allow me, I will start with my presentation. And well, thank you once again for giving us a space to share a little bit of the work that we have been doing. The idea will be to share the explorative work on the WCO data model projects team, the DMP team, which is the group that we're working on the WCO data model, which is a standardized and harmonized framework designed to facilitate the efficient exchange of data in cross-border regulatory process. I know that we have heard a little bit of this on standards and how they can come in. So hopefully this presentation will provide a little bit of this use. And to talk how linked data and the VCs as an exchange protocol can have a role with the WCO data model in such an exchange environment. The aim with this will be, of course, to improve global data interoperability and the quality within our WCO data model framework, and focusing on the potential benefits of this technology, which, as we have heard, we can simplify data integration and promote a more efficient and cost-effective data exchange process. So first, I would like to, hopefully with this slide, I will help to provide, at least at the high level, an indication of how the WCO data model is structured into different layers. So at the bottom layer, we'll have procedures or business processes, which are the basis of the data requirements. Then we'll have semantics within the WCO data model, referring to the data dictionary, the information model, which refers to the information packages that we have, and a syntax layer, which specifies the structures and format of the data. So the relationship between the WCO data model and linked data focuses on this syntax layer, which defines how data is formatted and exchanged. And at this level, linked data labels interoperability by structuring the data in a way that would allow integration across systems using, for example, JSON LD. The role of the data model I'll explain a little bit later, indicating how the data model relates the semantic level reference to this. But first of all, to understanding the linked data, so what it is, we have discussed a little bit about these integrations, the previous speakers, and unlike traditional electronic messages that contain the information in a single message, linked data reference information using the Uniform Resource Identifiers, the URIs. And in this method of publishing structured data on the web in such a way that it can be interlinked and become more useful through semantic queries. So, for example, instead of embedding all details about an exporter within a customs declaration, the declaration can link to an URI that provides the information more dynamically. And this approach could improve the data quality and consistency of the information is accessed from its source. And it also aligns with the principles of the WCO data model by ensuring that the data is structured and referenced efficiently. Now, to showcase practical applications in this custom declaration, so we can imagine the custom declaration, and with linked data, we can link this declaration to various related documents. We can talk about commercial invoices, bills of lading, packing lists, etc. And each of these documents can be referenced by the respective URIs, and this will facilitate a more integrated and comprehensive view of the trade process. So in the context of, for example, a single window environment, this means a custom declaration can reference also permits, licenses, all the LPCOs. Also, we could reference the involved parties in the process, having master data like the one of the exporters, the importers, the consignors. So overall, this shows examples of what potentially could be linked to a customs declaration, being the commercial document, the regulatory documents, information about the party business entities, etc. And as mentioned before, the primary advantage here compared to traditional data structures, well, all data is included in one message, typically provided by the declarant, is that the data originates from the source. So this enhances the data quality and reliability and ensures that customs authorities receive the most accurate and verified information possible. So this will be an example of this. However, linked data is only part of the solution. We, as discussed before, we must also ensure the authenticity and validity of the data that is being linked. And this is where verified credentials come into play. First, the linked data provides a mechanism to link this information, but how we can ensure that the linked data is valid and authentic. And this would be achieved through verified credential. This is the exploratory work that we're doing, where the cryptographic mechanism secure and verify the authenticity of this linked data. And for us, it will provide a secure and trustworthy method of validating the data. And well, as the systems of the VCs involve three components, the issuer, the holder, and the verifier. In this case, again, with the example of customs, a government department, for instance, which would be the user, can issue a credential, which in this case will be stored by the exporter, the holder, and later verified by customs authorities, which will be the verifier. And this is in a very high level, of course. This system will ensure that the data being referenced is both authentic and tamper-proof. Now, what will be the role of the WCO data model in this context? So when talking about linked data and VCs, the data model would potentially play the role, as before said, on the semantic level, helping to define the data dictionary and vocabulary necessary for creating a standardized approach to the data exchange. So on screen in this scenario, when, for example, an importer sends information to customs, it's essential that this information is authentic and accurate, of course, in these kind of systems. This assurance is provided by a trust layer that utilize this cryptographic technology to verify the authenticity and integrity of the data. The data will be exchanged then using protocols such as previously discussed, web service, where APIs, which in this case will be structured according to the linked data principles. And now linked data would rely on a semantic definition to ensure that the data from different sources can be linked and understood in a consistent manner by the different systems. And this is where the WCO data model supports this by providing the semantic definitions that underpin the linked data structure, enabling the publication of standardized data definitions tailored to customs data requirements, hopefully facilitating interoperability and data integrity across the entire customs process. This is some of what we have explored also. So currently we have seen that there are initiatives to define vocabulary for various market segments. However, what we have been seeing is that there's a significant opportunity to extend these efforts to cover customs and regulatory processes more comprehensively. And this is where the WCO can lead this work by establishing standardized vocabularies that address these unique requirements of global trade and customs operations. That would be what I wanted to share about this work. We have been initiating this in the past year. So of course, this is the way of us exploring new technologies and methodologies so we can improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the WCO data model with LD and VC, and hopefully to ensure that the WCO data model remains at the forefront of technology trends and meet these needs for modern customs and other cross-border regulatory operations. That will be from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. It was really interesting to hear, and I didn't know that WCO proceeded really deep to this topic, and it's actually a great idea that we already have agreed that verifiable credential, it's a kind of a container, but what will be inside of container and how they will each other understand, it's more important. And thank you for sharing your experience. I hope that there will be kind of report or something to read. And also you will strive other government agencies to implement the idea or to try to pilot the concept, and probably Mars and other companies will be in the loop of this pilot project to test the verifiable credentials. And of course, if it will be based on WCO data model, it can be interoperable, right? So among different stakeholders. Thank you very much for your great contribution. Actually, we are a bit run out of time, and now I'd like to start the Q&A session. We have more than 20 questions in our Q&A box, so we will not cover all of the questions for sure. Sorry for that. Let me find this question after the webinar, and I will pass this question to the speakers, and probably I will send to you in the written form. And actually, for us, ESCAP is working for cross-border paperless trade agreement. We have 14 member states who signed the agreement, and now we are talking about mutual recognition and many other stuff. We're trying to find an approach of how to create this mutual recognition mechanism. And for sure, our main efforts now is focusing on the core documents, which is which is operated by government agencies. Actually, today we have more representative from private sector, and we have discussed all of this B2B information exchange. And I'd like to hear from you. Is it great idea to have this verifiable credential concept for the government agencies, as they have long been the custodians of critical data, issuing the management documents like licenses, permits, and other stuff? Juan also mentioned that a single window exists with a lot of information. It can become a kind of verifiable credentials, and in order to believe each other, so you can get the data from the right place, and to present this to another government agency in another country, and in order to eliminate the needness, for example, of certificate of origin or phytosanitary certificate, all of this, I would say, G2G information exchange. Who wants to take the floor about the LPCO and government agencies, how they can implement the verifiable credential? What should be done for this?
I can offer you a start.
Sure, please. Will.
First of all, this is government data. It was paid for by the taxpayer. It's our data. Hand it over. But the other thing is that one of the great things that verifiable credentials allows is, and Stefan said this in his description earlier on, It allows the data to pass from one person to another. Doesn't matter how many people it goes through, doesn't matter what route it goes through, you know where it came from and you know it hasn't been tampered with. And therefore, it actually ends the need to constantly call home to check the API every time, and you can still be certain of it. So it's a massive increase in the decentralization and the scalability. And still you retain the integrity. And that, I hope, is very attractive to governments.
Thank you. Stefan, you want to add something?
Yeah, just to put a little bit of water into the wine. When we talk about single windows, we're talking about 100 different single windows at the moment. And people look at single windows and regulation mostly from a domestic point of view. So they try to build interfaces, they try to get all the customs declarations and everything in and so forth so that it suits their needs. But think of the poor corporate who wants to trade with 50 different countries and have 50 different, single windows. I find it incredible that the UK, which was, also front-running the Medita implementation, that the UK has, stalled the development of their single window. On one hand, budget restrictions, but on the other hand, I think it's a wise precaution to think again how you can construct this and how you can make this easier for corporates to deal with. So this gives us a round of possibilities to discuss the technical layers with government and with regulators to make sure that we do not end up in another, proliferation of islands.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Lars, please.
Yes, thank you. No, I agree with Stefan. When it comes to single trade windows, I've been involved in almost 30 of them around the world. It's absolutely critical true that is more about coordinating government agencies in the relationship to exchange data with private sector. But again, they are not harmonized, they're not standardized in the sense, even though I gotta say to Juan Diego that WTO has done a lot of good work in trying to support specifically customs as a lead agency in some of these examples. But my point would be that mutual recognition, as you say, Alex, is absolutely important here because, again, there are other standards like the, say, framework of standards from the WTO with authorized economic operators where you actually have identified peer mechanisms, review mechanisms between customs administration, between governments in technical agreements that sometimes is quicker to put in place and get operational from an exchange of data point of view than, for instance, free trade agreements and many other of our agreements that we have to simplify and actually make this work, even though there's some good kind of examples now also of exchanging on data. Just final point, I think that what we need to really make it valuable to government agencies to actually get it back to private sector in a reasonable way is that it's really not about only having the data or too much data, it's about when you get the data. So if you can get data earlier from source, that helps smarter risking at borders, which means actually that government agencies can both cooperate better in actually using their resources right to actually fight what they're there to do and do the task they're there to do. And at the same time, it makes borders, again, smarter and better to actually pass for private sector. And if we can standardize that in a way that doesn't have to be in one single way, but we agree on what are the critical data that they need and when do they need it, and also again exchange data back. What should private sector that is trusted or have been identified actually look for to have early warning signals back to the destination country to actually say this is something that is wrong that we found in risk management in a partnership in these type of where we have identified trusted trade type of stakeholders in the supply chain. Then we can make this work, and it's all about testing. Do it practically, test it instead of trying to find a perfect model. Thanks.
Step by step. Oh, completely agree. Pamela, you wanted to add?
Yes, just briefly, I think obviously policy direction, overall policy direction is necessary from the government to recognize that trust and verifiability are essential elements. Just a word of caution on whether we would like more detailed guidance from government. Number one, can it evolve fast enough? Two, will it properly engage the private sector in the development of such guidelines? And three, we should learn that there's a reason MLETR the model law for electronic transferable records does not weigh in on the types of technology which could be reliability. They're concerned about the outcome. And so I think that approach has actually has enabled MLETR to actually be considered in many government circumstances. So we do want a core and we do want agreement and alignment on policy, but the specifics may be a bit too detailed.
Indeed, I agree with you. When the government starts to to settle and regulate it, our traders like have a big pain about that, because one government will regulate this one way and another government in other countries they regulate in another way, and traders have to trade between each other. That's why there is already the problem of interoperability and other stuff. And unfortunately, the time is up. I wanted to ask many questions, which is really interesting and related to technical and different other aspects of verifiable credential. Probably we can proceed with this discussion during the paperless trade week. We'll see. I feel that this topic is relevant. Probably it's a good idea to get together in Bangkok and to continue our discussion. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Tengfei Wang, to wrap up this session. Thank you. Thank you, Tengfei. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexei. Greetings from Bangkok. My main job is really to look after the implementation of the framework agreement on facilitation cross-border paperless trade in Asia Pacific. So in this connection, you can probably feel that's how excited I was to listen to the insightful talks, presentations by esteemed speakers. I really learned a lot. I think this topic is really important, talking about trust and how to really achieve the recognition of trade-related documents. When we talk about the trust, I think the first important matter is about the understanding. If I don't understand what you say, it's quite difficult actually to trust. So in this sense, I've heard different speakers say that there are many different standards, many different single windows, different solutions. So if I put myself to the shoes of the users, I might be confused, like, which standard I should use, which solution I should adopt. And am I going to use one solution or a number of solutions together? So I think way forward, maybe we should have some language with tailor-made for the layman's language that which can be easily understood by the average users, and therefore might be easy for them to opt for solutions. The second, I think, is also important to talk about not only the benefit side. Of course, I think there's a lot of benefits to achieve cross-border paperless trade. But I think we should also be fair about the cost side. The cost can be for different persons, different users, shippers, etc. I'm very glad to hear that there's some free service available. But indeed, I think when we think about further, that's nothing really free, because given that's a really free service, for average user, they need to invest time to learn this solution. There's always opportunity cost. So I think it'd be really useful to help users to fully understand what the benefits and the costs for adopting different solutions. With these 2 points, I think I also want to finally mention what value that the framework agreement can add to the discussion. I think the framework agreement, as Alexei mentioned, that now we have already 14 countries have joined this UN treaty. And will bring the different stakeholders, not only the government officials, but also the industry, researchers, experts to the discussion. I think this framework really can bridge the communication. I think we can, convey the expertise in a layman language to better communicate with policymakers. I think this also can help strengthening partnership, as also emphasized by some speakers. So in this regard, I think probably Alexei mentioned to you that in June this year, we are going to have intergovernmental meetings on this UN treaty, but together with intergovernmental meetings, we also have separate meetings which are going to bring the expert industry to the discussion. So I hope that of you will be available to join our discussion, either in person or virtually. So with this, I stop here, Alexi. I give the floor back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teng Fei, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope you found this webinar insightful and inspiring. A huge thanks to our interpreters. And with that, I'd like to wish you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you.
You.